Join me in this moving story of courage and compassion that will touch your heart. When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett encounters Amelia, a struggling pregnant woman from rural Mississippi facing impossible choices, their lives become intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. Through unexpected challenges and powerful moments of human connection, witness how one woman's unwavering commitment to justice creates ripples that transform not just one life, but an entire community. This journey of hope reminds us that even in our most vulnerable moments, a single act of kindness can spark remarkable change. Where are you watching me from? Comment below and share how this story resonates with you. The fluorescent lights of the community center in Jackson, Mississippi, buzzed overhead as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone. Her town hall on healthcare access was winding down, but the determined look in her eyes hadn't dimmed despite the 3-hour session. At 42, Jasmine carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought her way through law school and into the halls of Congress, yet maintained the approachability that kept her connected to the people she served. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice warm but carrying the weight of purpose. "Remember, my office is always open to you." As the crowd dispersed, Jasmine noticed a young woman lingering in the back row. Her oversized sweater couldn't hide her advanced pregnancy, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights. Something about her hesitation tugged at Jasmine's heart. "Ma'am, did you have a question?" Jasmine called out, motioning her closer. The woman approached cautiously, clutching a worn folder of medical papers. "Congresswoman, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Amelia Wilson. I don't know where else to turn." Amelia's story tumbled out in fragments. 23 years old, 7 months pregnant, recently laid off from her factory job, denied Medicaid expansion due to a paperwork error and facing eviction from her apartment in rural Tupelo. Her voice cracked as she explained how the hospital was refusing prenatal care without insurance or cash up front. "They say there's nothing they can do," Amelia whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm afraid for my baby." Jasmine felt a familiar fire ignite within her, the same one that had propelled her from a small town in Arkansas to the Texas courtrooms, and eventually to Washington. This wasn't just another constituent problem. This was everything she had been fighting against. "May I?" Jasmine asked, gesturing to the paperwork. As she flipped through the documents, her expression hardened. This wasn't just bureaucratic inefficiency. This was systemic failure. "Amelia, this isn't right," she said firmly, meeting the younger woman's gaze, "and you're not going to face it alone anymore." Neither woman knew it then, but this chance encounter in a dimly lit community center would spark a chain of events that would challenge Jasmine's political resolve and transform Amelia's life in ways neither could have imagined. The next morning, Jasmine sat in her temporary office in Jackson, phone pressed to her ear as she navigated the labyrinth of Mississippi's healthcare bureaucracy. Amelia perched anxiously on a chair across from her, hands protectively cradling her belly. "No, that's completely unacceptable," Jasmine's voice cut through the office. "The documentation was submitted twice already. I'm looking at the receipt, right now." Each call ended the same way. Apologies, explanations about system backlogs, promises to escalate the case. After the 5th call, Jasmine set her phone down with controlled frustration. "They're stonewalling us," she said, the lines around her mouth deepening. "But this is far from over." Jasmine learned that Amelia's situation wasn't unique. Throughout, the district, pregnant women faced similar barriers, caught in a cruel gap where they earned too much for some programs but not enough for private insurance. The hospital administrators spoke of budget constraints and policies, their voices professional but unyielding. As days passed, complications arose. A local reporter who had attended the town hall caught wind of Jasmine's involvement and published a piece questioning whether the Congresswoman was overstepping boundaries by interfering in state matters. Conservative media outlets amplified the story, framing it as federal intrusion. "Congresswoman, there's something you should see," her assistant said grimly one afternoon, sliding a tablet across the desk. The headline read, "Crockett's Crusade, Political Stunt or Genuine Concern." Below it was a photo of Jasmine and Amelia, leaving the Medicaid office. Amelia's phone rang that evening. It was her former landlord, informing her that he was accelerating the eviction process. "Too much attention," he muttered before hanging up. When Amelia called Jasmine in tears, the Congresswoman felt the weight of unintended consequences. Her involvement had put an even bigger target on Amelia's back. "I'm coming over," Jasmine said, already reaching for her car keys. Amelia's apartment was barely large enough for a bed and a small table. The walls were thin enough that the neighbors' arguments provided an unwanted soundtrack. Jasmine sat on the only chair while Amelia perched on her bed. "Maybe this was a mistake," Amelia whispered, not meeting Jasmine's eyes. "I don't want to be anyone's political problem." Jasmine leaned forward, her expression intense. "Listen to me carefully, Amelia. You are not a political problem. You are a human being deserving of dignity and care. What's happening to you is happening to thousands of women across this country, and it stops now, starting with you." As she spoke, Jasmine realized she was no longer thinking as a politician calculating moves and consequences. This had become deeply personal, resonating with her own mother's struggles years ago in Arkansas. "We have two fights now," Jasmine said firmly. "Getting you the care you need and changing the system that failed you in the first place." 3 weeks later, Jasmine stood before a House committee in Washington, her testimony on maternal health care disparities drawing to a close. The chamber was silent as she held up a folder, Amelia's medical records with personal details redacted. "This isn't about politics," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "This is about Amelia and thousands of women like her who fall through the cracks we've designed into our system." The testimony went viral, clips spreading across social media platforms within hours. Back in Mississippi, Amelia watched from a small motel room where Jasmine had helped relocate her temporarily. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from women sharing similar stories. That evening, Amelia's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Dr. Sarah Patel from University Medical Center." The voice was professional but kind. "We've reviewed your case and we'd like to enroll you in our maternal care program immediately." Amelia's hands trembled. "I don't understand. What changed?" "Let's just say there's been significant donor interest in expanding our program for underinsured expectant mothers," Dr. Patel replied carefully. "We have an opening for you tomorrow at 10 a.m. When Amelia called to share the news, Jasmine's response was measured. "That's wonderful, Amelia, but don't think for a second this solves the bigger problem." The next day, while Amelia finally received the prenatal care she desperately needed, Jasmine received an unexpected visitor in her D.C. office. Senator Marshall Hayes, a moderate Republican from Tennessee with a reputation for occasional bipartisan cooperation. "Your testimony was compelling, Congresswoman," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "But more importantly, it was specific. You put a face to the statistics." Hayes revealed that his daughter had experienced similar insurance gaps during her pregnancy last year. Despite their family's resources, she had me to help her navigate it. "Most women don't have a senator for a father." "What are you proposing, Senator?" Jasmine asked cautiously. "A targeted bill addressing maternal health care gaps, narrow enough to potentially pass in this climate." He slid a folder across her desk. "I need a strong Democrat as co-sponsor, one who understands the issue beyond the talking points." As Jasmine reviewed the preliminary draft, she recognized this rare opportunity for actual progress. But she also saw the political calculations. Hayes was up for re-election in a changing state, and this could help his moderate credentials. "I'll need significant revisions," she said finally. "And real funding, not just symbolic gestures." Hayes nodded. "I expected nothing less from you, Congresswoman." That night, as Jasmine called Amelia to check on her appointment, she wrestled with whether this compromise would be seen as abandoning her progressive principles or as pragmatic progress. But hearing the relief in Amelia's voice settled something within her. Sometimes change came through loud protests, and sometimes through quiet negotiations in wood-paneled offices. Both had their place. The draft legislation faced immediate headwinds. Progressive colleagues questioned why Jasmine was working with Hayes,
'while conservative media painted her as using Amelia's story for political gain.
while conservative media painted her as using Amelia's story for political gain. While conservative media painted her as using Amelia's story for political gain. Amelia herself faced backlash in her community, with anonymous online comments suggesting she was looking for handouts or being used as a political prop. Jasmine found herself in the uncomfortable position of defending her approach to her own political allies. "I understand your concerns," she told Congresswoman Diaz, one of her closest allies, as they walked the Capitol corridors. "But this bill could help thousands of women immediately while we continue fighting for universal coverage." "And you trust Hayes?" Diaz asked skeptically. "Trust isn't the right word," Jasmine replied. "But I believe in this specific moment our interests align." The legislation underwent numerous revisions, each one threatening to derail the fragile coalition supporting. Meanwhile, Amelia's due date approached. Though she now had medical care, she still lacked stable housing and had no job prospects in her condition. One evening, after a particularly brutal negotiation session where key provisions of the bill were threatened, Jasmine called Amelia from her office. "How are you feeling?" she asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Scared," Amelia admitted. "But not like before. Before I was scared and alone. Now I'm just scared like any first-time mom, I guess." Something in Amelia's words resonated deeply with Jasmine. Despite everything, Amelia had found a quiet strength, a resilience that had nothing to do with political maneuvering. "Amelia, can I ask you something important?" Jasmine said suddenly. "The media wants me to bring you to the next committee hearing. Your story in your own words would be powerful. But I need you to know, you can say no. This isn't part of our deal." The silence stretched between them for several moments. "Will it help other women?" Amelia finally asked. "Honestly, I don't know. It might. Or it might just expose you to more scrutiny." Amelia's voice strengthened. "I'll do it. Not for you or your bill. For the next woman who thinks she has to face this alone." The day of the hearing, Amelia's testimony cut through the political theater. She spoke without prepared remarks, her swollen belly visible evidence of what was at stake. She described the fear of choosing between rent and prenatal vitamins, of being treated like a burden on the system rather than a mother bringing new life into the world. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she concluded quietly. "I'm asking for a system that sees me as a human being." As they left the hearing room, surrounded by press clamoring for statements, Jasmine noticed a change in Amelia, a straightened spine, eyes that met cameras without flinching. Whatever happened with the legislation, Amelia had found her voice. That night, as Jasmine reviewed the latest amendments to the bill, she realized she too had changed. The tactical politician still calculated paths to victory, but now there was something else guiding her as well. The knowledge that behind every policy fight were real people waiting for relief. 2 months later, the Maternal Health Care Access Act passed the House by a narrow margin and moved to the Senate with uncertain prospects. Jasmine had made painful compromises to secure the necessary votes, each concession feeling like a personal failure despite the progress. Meanwhile, Amelia had become something of a reluctant public figure. Her story had resonated with women nationwide, and she received countless messages from those in similar situations. Local community organizations had helped her secure temporary housing, though permanent solutions remained elusive. As the Senate debate began, Jasmine was summoned to a closed door, meeting with party leadership. "We need to be strategic about this," the majority leader explained, his tone measured. "The midterms are coming, and maternal health is polling well. Maybe we hold this until after, when we could potentially pass something stronger." Jasmine felt ice in her veins. "You want to delay help for political timing?" "I want to maximize impact," he countered. "This bill is watered down. We could do better with stronger numbers." Before Jasmine could respond, her phone vibrated with an urgent message. Amelia had gone into labor 6 weeks early. "I have to go," she said, standing abruptly. "And when I return, we're going to have a longer conversation about what we stand for." At the hospital, Jasmine found Amelia in distress, the monitors beeping urgently as doctors spoke in hurried tones about preeclampsia and emergency interventions. Despite her prenatal care, the accumulated stress and previous lack of early treatment had taken their toll. "Jasmine," Amelia gasped between contractions, gripping the Congresswoman's hand with surprising strength. "If something happens, nothing is happening to you or this baby," Jasmine interrupted fiercely. "Not today." Hours blurred as Jasmine remained by Amelia's side, witnessing firsthand the reality of maternal care that couldn't be captured in legislation or testimony. She saw the dedicated nurses working double shifts, the overworked doctor consulting references for insurance codes between contractions, the entire fragile system barely holding together through human determination rather than structural support. When Amelia's baby girl finally arrived, small but fighting, Jasmine stepped into the hallway and made a call to Senator Hayes. "I need this bill on the floor next week," she said without preamble. "No more negotiations, no more delays. The vote count isn't there yet," Hayes replied cautiously. "Then we change the count," Jasmine said, her voice steady as she watched through the nursery window as the tiny infant was connected to monitors. "I just watched a woman nearly die from a preventable condition because we've been playing politics with healthcare. I'm done playing." The next morning, against medical advice, Jasmine helped Amelia sit up in her hospital bed for a video call. With her newborn daughter cradled against her chest, Amelia addressed the Senate committee directly, her voice weak but determined. "This is Jasmine," she said, looking down at her daughter. "Named for someone who saw me when no one else would. She deserves to live in a country where her mother's life matters." The video, released with Amelia's permission, spread rapidly across social media platforms. Senate offices reported unprecedented call volumes. Public opinion shifted overnight from abstract policy debate to urgent moral imperative. 1 year later, Jasmine Crockett stood in the Rose Garden, watching as the president signed the expanded Maternal Health Care Protection Act into law. The legislation, though imperfect, created critical safeguards for pregnant women regardless of insurance status and expanded postpartum care coverage nationwide. Senator Hayes stood nearby, their unlikely alliance having weathered numerous challenges. They weren't friends. Their fundamental political differences remained. But they had found a path to meaningful collaboration on this specific issue. "Congresswoman," a familiar voice called from the audience. Amelia approached, looking transformed, from the desperate woman Jasmine had first met in that community center. She carried baby Jasmine on her hip, the toddler's curious eyes taking in the formal gathering with fascination. "We did it," Jasmine said, embracing them both carefully. "You did it," Amelia corrected gently. "I just told my story." "Stories change everything," Jasmine replied. "Never underestimate that." After the ceremony, they walked together across the lawn, catching up on developments. Amelia had completed a certification program in patient advocacy and now worked for a community health center in Jackson, helping other women navigate the healthcare system. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Amelia had become an expert in the very bureaucracy that had once nearly crushed her. "The housing co-op is finally opening next month," Amelia said excitedly, referring to the innovative program Jasmine had helped establish with private grants and community development funds. 10 units for single mothers with on-site childcare and job training. "And you'll be the first resident manager," Jasmine added with pride. As they reached the White House gates, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the journey. When she'd first entered politics, she had imagined change coming through grand legislation and sweeping reforms. She hadn't anticipated how transformation often began with a single encounter, one person's story creating ripples that eventually reached the highest levels of power. "There's something I've never told you," Amelia said suddenly, adjusting her daughter on her hip. "That night at the town hall, I wasn't planning to speak to you. I was just there because the community center was warm and my apartment heat had been cut off." Jasmine felt a chill at how easily their paths might never have crossed. "Sometimes the most important moments find us when we're just trying to stay warm," she said softly. As they parted ways, Jasmine watched Amelia walk confidently toward her future, no longer defined by what she lacked but by what she had helped create. In that moment, Jasmine understood that her most significant achievement wasn't the legislation bearing her name, but the space she had created for Amelia's voice. and through it the voices of countless others to be heard. 5 years later, Jasmine stood at the podium of the Democratic National Convention, the roar of the crowd washing over her as she prepared to accept her party's nomination for Vice President of the United States. The journey from freshman Congresswoman to this historic moment had been neither straight nor easy, but as she gazed out at the sea of faces, she felt the weight of purpose rather than ambition. In the front row sat Amelia, now the executive director of the Maternal Justice Coalition, a national advocacy organization born from that first healthcare bill. Beside her was 6-year-old Jasmine, waving excitedly at her namesake on stage. "My fellow Americans," Jasmine began, her voice strong and clear. "They say politics is about power, but true power isn't measured in votes or titles. It's measured in lives transformed." She spoke of her vision for the country, not in abstract ideals but in concrete realities. Healthcare that recognized every person's dignity. Housing that fostered community rather than isolated families. Education that prepared children not just for jobs, but for citizenship. 5 years ago, I met a young woman who changed my understanding of what it means to serve. Jasmine continued, her eyes finding Amelia in the crowd. She taught me that behind every statistic is a story. Behind every policy debate is a person waiting for us to see them. The crowd fell silent as Jasmine described how that chance encounter had rippled outward. The Maternal Health Care Protection Act had saved an estimated 1,200 lives in its first 4 years. The housing model pioneered in Jackson had been replicated in 37 cities across the country. Amelia's advocacy had helped train over 5,000 community healthcare navigators. "This is how change happens," Jasmine said, her voice carrying to the furthest reaches of the convention hall. "Not always through grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but through moments of connection that remind us of our common humanity." As she concluded her acceptance speech, Jasmine departed from her prepared remarks to share a final reflection. "Many of you know that I don't have children of my own," she said quietly. "But I've learned that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by who stays beside you in the hospital room, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself, who sees your potential when systems are designed to overlook you." The camera panned to Amelia and young Jasmine, their faces radiant with pride and possibility. "Whatever happens in November," Jasmine concluded, "remember this. Your story matters. Your voice has power. And no one, stands alone when we truly see each other." As the convention erupted in thunderous applause, Jasmine stepped away from the podium, no longer simply a politician but a vessel for the countless stories that had shaped her journey. None more important than that first encounter in a dimly lit community center with a woman who had simply been looking for warmth. This journey reminds us that true leadership isn't measured in titles or power, but in the courage to see others when systems render them invisible. Jasmine and Amelia's story shows how personal connection transcends political divisions, creating ripples of change that transform individual lives and eventually entire communities. Their legacy isn't just in legislation, but in the profound truth that when we recognize each other's humanity, we discover our collective strength. Which part of this story surprised you most? Subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, your story matters, and in sharing it, you may just change someone's world.